What is going on, gunfighters? Welcome back to Gunfighter Life, the podcast where we talk about gunfighting with God at the center and real-world first-hand experience. Today, gonna try, by God's grace, kind of an audio walk through an explanation of reloading. Because I know there's a large part of the community that shoots and is into shooting, whether it be the tactical kind or the hunting kind or any other kind, that might be interested in reloading, but it seems like some kind of super complicated, highly technical process, which it doesn't have to be. Maybe after listening today, if you've been wanting to give it a shot, it'll give you that little push and that confidence to be like, hey, I think I can do this. And hopefully that does happen for many of you listening. With that, make sure you're liked and subscribed to this podcast if you want to be. Don't forget to scroll down and hit some stars if that platform you're listening, like iTunes or Spotify, lets you. Gonna plug in the bio and then we'll get into the main topic. Who am I? A question we should all ask ourselves. I am, first and foremost, a servant of God, made in His very own image. A follower of Jesus Christ. A simple man called by God to the Great Commission to share the good news of Jesus Christ. Next, a little bit about my background and what God has allowed me to do and blessed me to do in life. Grew up what most would consider very poor in the backwoods of the southeastern and mid-Atlantic United States, hunting and fishing. Joined the Marine Corps at 17. Did a couple of combat tours in Iraq. So a decorated Marine Corps combat veteran. Infantry assaultman. After the combat tours, I was an urban warfare instructor for the United States Marine Corps under Mojave Viper. I also served in the U.S. Army, both full-time and part-time National Guard. Also a veteran of law enforcement. I served with LAPD. I was a sworn peace officer, a cop for LAPD. I worked regular patrol assignments and more specialized assignments. One of those more specialized assignments was warrant service, fugitive recovery. Also had some other law enforcement roles. I am an FBI certified firearms instructor and been certified by another 3-letter government agency in a lot of firearms and training things. I've also been a private contractor, worked in the private sector pertaining to tactics and gunfighting and protecting America from enemies foreign and domestic. I served as the commander of a tactical team to stop active shooters in a large metropolitan area. That was our primary mission, to stop active shooters, which sadly are a thing in America today. I've also been blessed to do quite a bit of competition shooting. Started my first formal competitions even before joining the Marine Corps at 17. I had won more shooting competitions than I can remember. I have competed in all manner of disciplines in shooting. I've been blessed to be a state rifle and pistol champion, West Coast regional champion. Like I said, been blessed to win more shooting competitions than I can remember. Mentioned hunting. I've hunted to put meat on the table starting when I was a child. I've also been a professional big game hunter and guide, hunting and slaying all manner of beast. And I don't apologize for that. Humbled to be the host of 3 podcasts. Simple Man Sermons, Alpha Male Podcast, and Gunfighter Life. Obviously, as things not mentioned, I've been blessed to do many other things. But, again, first and foremost, I'm a servant of God, a believer and follower of the Bible, the Word, Jesus Christ. And I don't apologize for that. With that, let's transition into today's topic. Today's episode is being recorded by God's grace on the 28th day of September in the year of our Lord 2022. I'm going to talk about reloading today. Going to talk a little bit about the process of reloading and maybe why you may want to reload. Talking about reloading, we're talking about modern brass cartridges. And kind of one of the most expensive parts of a cartridge is the brass case. And you just drop it on the ground when you're done, which seems kind of silly when you could reuse it, Maybe we can take one from the hippies here, from the environmentalists. Recycle. Get more bang for your buck, literally, in reloading. Take that brass cartridge case and reuse it. It's probably the most difficult thing to machine, aside from some crazy projectile or something. For a lot of common cartridges, it's not impossible or even difficult to make your own projectiles, but it's pretty difficult to make your own brass case. So why don't we reuse that bad boy? So that's what we're going to talk about today. Reloading ammunition. I'm going to start by walking you through what I consider the simplest version of reloading. I'm going to be talking about a traditional pistol cartridge. And I'm going to call it a straight wall pistol cartridge. Like 38 Special, 44 Special, 357 Magnum, 44 Magnum. Even though like 9mm is tapered, for the intents of reloading, it's pretty much the same as a straight-walled pistol cartridge. I'm talking not like 357 SIG where it's a bottlenecked cartridge or 5x7 or something. That's going to be more complicated to reload. I'm talking about a straight-walled pistol cartridge, most of your common pistol cartridges. So if you want to get started in reloading, this is where I would encourage you to start. Unless we're talking shotgun, which would be a whole other podcast, a whole different process. So let's start this, and I'm going to try and narrate this as best I can in audio format. Do you understand the process? So you fired that brass case. You pick it up off the ground. You may want to clean it up a little bit. We do this called tumbling. We tumble it in some corn cob or some other kind of media, walnut shells, just to get some dirt and polish up that brass a little bit. You don't actually have to do that. You can skip that step if you're just getting into it and you don't really care what the brass looks like. Redneck way of doing this that I used to do is get an old protein container or an old coffee can, something like it, throw some of that media in there and throw it in the back of your truck, the bed of your truck, and let it roll around as you drive around doing your daily stuff. You take that case out of there. Once you fired it, it expanded into your chamber, so it's not the same size that it was. If you went to put a new projectile in the top, you would notice that it didn't fit snugly. It would just fall in and out, which obviously you can't have. Not to mention, different guns have different chamber sizes. You need a universal chamber size, so that round will fit in any chamber. For that, you need a press. Now, the press does lots of functions, but we're going to start with this. The press with the appropriate dies, and a die is just a caliber-specific set of gauges that forces the brass into different shapes. It's the best way to describe it. To machined out pieces of steel that force the brass to shape in different ways. Your first die is going to be your resizing die. You're going to take that expanded brass, let's for imagination's sake say that 38 Special or 9mm. You're going to put it in the press, and it's got what's called a shell holder on the bottom. These are not as specific as the dies, but you have a shell holder. You put your shell in there in the bottom, and it's got like a ramrod, like a giant steel rod. It's connected to a handle. When you pull the handle down, it shoves that rod up into the die, and you force by physical manual pressure. A lot of times pistol dies won't need lube or anything. Some will. You got to read that. But you force that brass up into that die, and it resizes it to the correct diameter so that you can reload it. It'll fit into any chamber as long as that chamber's cut right, and it will take the projectile and seat it snugly. So you're resizing it. At the same time, there's a little pin that comes down in the center of that die that knocks out your old primer. That primer has already been used. It's a one-time deal, so you have to knock that old primer out. Most operations will do this at the same time. It'll resize and deprime that case. So it'll force that case into the right size and it will knock that primer out. Now the next step, you're going to have to put a new primer in before you can put powder in, otherwise it'll spill out. So to get a new primer in, there's a couple of different ways. There's hand priming tools. A lot of times the press that we talked about, which is the big mechanical device that literally presses the brass up, if you push the handle the other way and shove it down, it'll have a little feeder arm that can put a new primer in there. However you get that new primer in there, you put a new primer in there, you have a new primer in the case. So now you have a primed and resized case. The next step, you need powder in there. You need that force, that potential energy, which is all that gunpowder is. It's a store of potential energy. And you're going to have to do your research on whatever powder charge you're going to use, but a real common one would be like 700X, 800X for the type of cartridges we're talking about. Real classic, red dot, blue dot. You don't have to know what those are, but they're real classic, powders. And I'm not going to give you weights or anything, but you're going to dump in the correct powder charge. If you're doing this, you should have a reloading manual. But you're going to dump in that powder. A real easy, basic way to do this is you're going to have some kind of scale to measure this out. And a real easy way to do this sometimes is just a dipper. Like some companies make different dip sets. It's literally like measuring spoons you use to measure in baking, like baking powder. And you volumetrically measure the powder. So you might not even need a scale. You may have one of these little spoons and you literally measure by volume. If you know that this size spoon in 700X, if you scrape off the top and make it level, just like in baking, it equals, and it'll have a little chart with the common powders, or you can look it up. Say this spoonful of 700X equals, 4.1 grains. And you're like, great, that's what I want. I'm going to use that spoon and dump it into each and every case. So now you've got your case, you've put powder in it. There's powder in it. Now you got to set a projectile on top of that. So whatever your projectile is, you're loading your 38 Special, you got 158 grain lead semi-wad cutter, or 148 grain lead semi-wad cutter is probably more common. You're going to set that on top of there. You're going to ram it up into the press again. It's going to seat that bullet, and probably if you have the appropriate dies, it'll seat it and then crimp it. So you seat it in there and then you get a crimp on top of it. You may or may not crimp your rounds. Some people do, some people don't. Sometimes it's necessary, sometimes it's not. But anyway, you put the new projectile, you literally seat it to the correct depth so it's the right overall length in that cartridge. And you know what? We're done. That's a completely loaded and hot cartridge. You have now reloaded ammunition. We talked about it by doing one cartridge. Obviously, you want to be efficient, you're going to reload a bunch at a time. I really, really encourage you, if you are getting into reloading, to buy a single stage press. Lee's probably your best bang for your buck, but our CBS, Hornady, Foster, any single stage press, even if you get a progressive press, you're still going to want a single stage press. Because if you've ever done a lot of reloading, changing out loads on a progressive press is a pain. Usually you'll get a load that you want. You're like, this is my 45 load, and you set it on the press. And one of two things, you either just do it as a sunk cost and say, this press is for this load and I'm never going to change it because it's that much of a pain in the butt. Like, this is my competition load, the press is set, and unless for some reason I change my competition load, this press is always for this load. Or you just sit down on a weekend and say, you know what, I'm going to load all the ammo for 45 ACP that I plan to shoot this year and knock it all out, and then you change your press and say, I'm going to reload all the 9mm over the next 3 weeks that I'm going to shoot for this year. But if you get a progressive press in the beginning, it's going to be an exercise in frustration. They're not easy to change. So a lot of times, even if you have a progressive press, you're still going to want that single stage press to experiment with loads and load up, let's say, 25 rounds and go out and shoot them and say, oh, this load works good, or oh, this load sucks in my gun. For whatever reason, maybe it double feeds, maybe it doesn't have enough power to cycle to slide, maybe it has too much power, whatever. But it's much easier to experiment and do different loads on a single stage press. And it's much easier to learn on a single stage press. So I would encourage you to get one. Even if you decide that later you want a progressive, you're going to want a single stage press. I encourage you not, as good as they are, don't go out and run out and buy a Dillon 650 and start on it. You're better off starting out with a Lee, whatever they are with inflation now, $100, $150 press set. But I want to reiterate, it's not a super complicated process. I think I started reloading when I was maybe 12 years old, and I'm just guessing there. I really can't remember, but I was young, maybe younger than that. And we're talking like smelting and casting your own lead, like hot molten lead, and pouring it into molds and making bullets. So it's not a super complicated process. Don't make it that way. People have been making ammunition in their garages for decades and decades. And not that it never happens, but when's the last time you heard of somebody seriously getting injured from reloading versus the last time you heard of somebody seriously getting injured in a car accident or falling out of a tree stand, right? Or any other thing, or a bowstring snapping and making somebody blind. It's not that it's not dangerous at all. It's that many other things that we do are far more dangerous. So don't let that stop you. Next, we'll get into the why. Why might you want to reload? Well, a big one, and a reason a lot of people get into it, is cost. Now, I'm going to tell you right now, if you're doing a common round like 5.56, 223, or 9mm, we've gotten to the point with industrial capacity where that's really not a thing, especially for quality. If you want to buy bulk 9mm, you can probably buy it about as cheap as you can reload, especially if you factor in, let's say, paying yourself minimum wage to do it. So, not there, but if you're reloading a less common round, like, go price what a box of 357 costs. And it's really not much more for you to reload 357 than it is for you to reload 9mm. So if you shoot things like 357, some other real common ones that are way cheaper to reload, 45 long Colt, 4570, something even more obscure like a 35 Whalen. Yeah, you can buy factory ammo for that, but especially you're talking about like cost analysis, it's a lot cheaper to reload. The other one, and a really cool one, is if you like to tinker around with stuff and you like to kind of get off the beaten path of, if you want 115 grain 9mm, you can go get that in abundance. But let's say you want something a little bit more specialized. Let's say you have a 44 Magnum lever gun, and you know that 44 Magnum lever guns will shoot 44 special. And you want something quiet. If you get that long barrel and load a heavy for caliber bullet subsonic, let's say a 300 grain bullet in 44 special at its super low velocity, subsonic velocity, not some crazy load that's below the threshold, but like a published load, just heavy for caliber in a 44 special in a long barrel, that it's going to be super quiet. Like scary, maybe quieter than, well, certainly probably quieter than an AR with a suppressor quiet. You're not doing anything illegal, you're not doing anything underhand. No laws against this. You can literally load that yourself and shoot it, and you have a super quiet, still very deadly load. Look at the ballistics on, say, a 300 grain 44 special load out of a carbine versus some of these, what they would consider super powerful nowadays, air rifles that they hunt big game with. And it's still going to be more powerful than that. When you loaded it yourself, it's not expensive, and you have a super quiet, super stealthy round. You could do the same thing with 4570. You could just do the same thing with 38 special. So there's stuff like that. Let's say that you are a 44 mag guy and your 44 mag is your one go-to survival weapon. We've talked about like the one gun thing before, right? Like the peanut butter and chocolate has hit the fan and you're heading into the hills. You're taking your 44 revolver and your 44 lever gun. That's your apocalyptic loadout, right? That's what you're heading into the hills with. Well, good on you. If you reload, you can do a lot with that. You can load your hot 44 Magnum rounds, especially in a carbine. You can load those pretty hot in, like, let's say a Marlin carbine and a Ruger handgun. You can go pretty wild on the amount of power on that for, like, big, large game. Kind of redundant, big, large game, but large game like elk and big black bear and brown bear and things like that. You can go real mild. You can load, for that same gun or those same two guns, you can load some kind of powder puff 44 special loads. Why might you want to do that? Well, because maybe you don't see a deer that day. Maybe you see a spruce grouse at 10 yards away, and you don't want to shoot him with a full power 44 Magnum. You want to shoot him with a slow-moving hunk of lead that won't destroy that meat. So you can do that. And maybe you want to load some shot shells, which you can do. They make little plastic shot capsules that you can reload yourself. And you may want to reload those with a variety of different shot for if you come across a rattlesnake, which is not uncommon on a trail. You get real desperate and don't think you can't come to this, where you're shooting things like Tweety birds to, get some kind of protein source in addition to your foraging. Or let's say probably a more common scenario than that one is you just want to have your kids or your wife or somebody go out and go shooting with you, or somebody that's never shot before. Give them a revolver or a lever gun, which most people really like to shoot. And you can load that powder puff load that has very, very little recoil, very, very little report, and they can learn on a gun and have fun and shoot maybe when they're ready to step up from that, 22 into something centerfire, but you want to give them that gentle progression. Totally reasonable, total good thing to do with your reloading and those kind of calibers. Another big one is precision. We talked about the cost of ammo. Well, if you want really high-grade rifle match-grade ammo, and rifle reloading is a whole different thing with a lot more that goes into it. That's why we didn't start there. But that is a big reason people reload. They want a precise load for their gun, and they don't want to spend $2-3 a round on it. That's another reason for reloading. A lot of people may think of it for like survival and prepping, but that only works if you can get the components or make the components. So really think about that. Sometimes it's powder you can't get. Sometimes it's primers you can't get. So if you're going to do it, you need to make sure you have it. Because if you can't get the ammo, you probably can't get the reloading supplies, because the same companies that make the ammo make the reloading supplies. So just be aware of that. I'm not saying it's a bad idea, but make sure you stock up on primers and powder and whatever else that you might need. Doesn't mean that you can buy a reloading press and then next time there's an ammo shortage you can just make as much ammo as you want. Ask anybody in the last 2 years that looked for small rifle and small pistol primers. With that, I hope you've enjoyed this narration of reloading. And I hope that if you've been on the fence, this has given you the confidence. And if you have no desire in it, at least now hopefully you better understand reloading. If any of those is the case and you think this knowledge is worth something, a lot of times, sadly, in our modern American culture, it seems that we value stuff more than knowledge. If you value this knowledge and you think it was worth something, consider going to goodshepherdtraining.com and clicking on the Patreon link. If you want to support the podcast in other ways, again, you can like and subscribe, share it with a friend. With that, your tactical tip of the day. If you're into shooting and training, which I hope you are, in like dynamic movement outside, sometimes the conditions aren't great. Sometimes it's snowy and grassy and things like that. And you might drop a magazine, whether intentionally doing your speed reloads or just moving with all your gear on. So for my training mags, and I usually have a couple of my older magazines set aside for training, those little sticky targets, the bright orange, bright green, whatever they are, you take that and you stick it on the base pad of that magazine. And you may or may not want to number it, training 1, training 2, opposed to like combat 1 or combat 2 on your other mags. That bright colored sticky does a couple of things. One, it'll let you know that it's a training mag. And number 2, if you drop it in the desert, running through a wadi, or in the tall grass when you're doing your, El Prez drills or whatever, it makes it a lot easier to find. Sure, you can hit it with some spray paint. Some people don't like doing that. I don't really care. But those little stickies, and if you ever want to sell the mag or whatever, you can just take the sticky off. Anyway, those bright colored stickies on the bottom of your magazine. I've also seen nail polish, like an obnoxious color of nail polish to number your mags. But I find those bright sticky targets, like the size of a quarter, really work well for helping find your mag and differentiating between training mags and combat mags. My combat mags, I don't generally put stickies on. I'll generally either paint them or just take a paint Sharpie and write whatever I want to write on there. Anyway, with that, thanks for listening. And hopefully the moment you've all been waiting for, the tactical verse of the day. God resists the proud, but gives grace to the humble. Resist the devil and he will flee from you. Draw near to God and he will draw near to you. Cleanse your hands, you sinners. You'll find that in James. Humble yourself You see that other place is another good verse. Humble yourself under the mighty hand of God, that he may exalt you in due time, casting all your cares upon him because he cares for you. Be sober and vigilant, because your adversary the devil prowls around like a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour. But be humble. Be humble with God. For what do you have that you did not first receive from God? Anything that you have, any talent, any skill, any ability, any resource, God gave it to you. You didn't create it in and of yourself. All matter, all substance, all things come from God, and every good and perfect gift is from above. So what do you have to be prideful about if God gave you whatever you have? Are you smart? God gave you that brain. Are you disciplined? God gave you that discipline. Are you strong? God gave you that strength. You see where I'm going with that. So be humble. Be humble with God and resist the devil. Resist the devil and he will flee from you. Draw near to God and he will draw near to you. So whatever season you are in life, in rejoicing, in grief, in struggling with this thing or that thing, I don't know. And I don't know the answer. But I know it's always the right answer to go to God, because he always has the answers, and it's always good to go to God. Draw near to God, and he will draw near to you. Whatever season, it's always the right answer to go to God. With that, men, thanks for listening. Have a blessed day.